Good evening, church. We want to welcome everybody that has come out this evening. We're very grateful that you have decided to worship with us. To those that are watching online, whenever or however you might be watching this, whether it's today, tonight, if it's tomorrow, if it's on your laptop while you're at work, or maybe you are at the deer lease and you're watching this, we want you to know that we are incredibly grateful for the time, for your time. And we try very hard to communicate that sentiment and probably don't do it nearly as often as we should. But we are very, very grateful to you and for you. You know, the crowd, something about this crowd tonight looks a little different. You guys look like you are the fans of the world champion Texas Rangers. The first place, the best baseball team in Texas, right? In the world, but especially in Texas. What's that? Well, that's true. That is true. No, it is a fun time to be a sports fan. I am incredibly grateful for the songs that were led. There's no doubt, on a serious note, that many of you, many of our contingency here, are going through difficult times, and that's true for us. Like, we have a service in which we communicate those things on a weekly basis. Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, we talk about it. We have a text thread, but it's not just true for us, it's true for everybody, right? There's people that aren't part of the church, okay, whether they identify as a Christian or not. If they do, they might not worship here, or they might not be worshiping anywhere, that are going through tough times, which makes tonight's lesson important. I talked to Mike earlier this week, actually maybe last week, and was asking him what his message was going to be about if he had a text, because I want to say something that maybe is kind of flows well from Sunday morning's message. And he said, well, I'm going to be talking about the gospel. And I said, well, after listening to him for a minute, I said, okay, I think I know what I want to talk about. And it's about gospelizing. There's not a person, certainly there's probably not a person here who doesn't know that we have a responsibility to share the gospel of Jesus with those that we know, right? Those that we have opportunity with, that we have influence with. Our problem isn't knowing that. Our problem is doing it. It's so often, I know this was certainly true for me, like when I came out of Sunset, it was, go tell them. Go tell them. You have a message to tell, go tell them. And I really didn't know how to do that. I knew that I wanted to tell them, but I didn't know how. And that's what tonight's message is aimed at. It's a nuance of our mission. It's the how-to of spreading the gospel. Tonight's message is titled Small Talks. And as you can see here, our conversation this evening, the text that we are going to be looking at this evening is found in Luke chapter 24, and we're going to be in that text in just a moment. So if you have your Bibles, you'll want to open up to Luke chapter 24. We're going to start in verse 13, and we're going to only read to verse 27. We're not going to look at the entire account, though I will say some very, very brief things about what happens after this account. Because what happens is ultimately what I think we want for ourselves and what we want for the different circles of influence that environments, that we occupy, and that is for people to be saved. Yes, for people to understand who Jesus is. So how do we do that? Have you heard the story of the older man who is walking down the road, and he looks across a few houses down, and in front of him there is this small boy that is in front of a door of a house, and he is on his tippy toes because of how small he is and how short his arms are, trying to push the doorbell. And so as the man is walking, he is seeing the young person kind of struggle. He's reaching, he's trying, but he's not quite tall enough. And so the older man walks across the road, and he walks up behind this young boy, and he reaches down, he puts his hand on his shoulder, and then he gives a firm push on the doorbell. The boy turns around and he smiles, and the old man, with a benevolent grin on his face, says, "Okay, young man, what now?" And the little boy responded, "Now we run." I use that illustration to make, in kind of a humorous way, a simple observation. And that is this: that without having clarity of what a person believes, it's going to be hard for us to be able to move in the right way, especially with regard to trying to help that person. I mean, I'm sure we would all agree that there's been times in our life where we have opened our mouth too soon and closed our ears too soon, where we gave an answer before we really understood a situation. What am I talking about? I'm talking about listening. And I'm talking about being present. I'm talking about being aware. If we want to be helpful to people, okay, and by the way, helpful is my byword for evangelism, because there's no greater help that we can give somebody than Jesus. That is the greatest gift that we can help them understand. If we truly want to be helpful, we have to understand who we are talking to before we do that. That's what I really want to talk about for a few minutes this evening. This idea of being helpful, I believe, is all over this text in Luke chapter 24. The first thing that I would want to, impress upon you is this: that wherever you are, okay, wherever you are, be present. Be completely present. Because what we find in this text is Jesus is present. And can we just admit that this is something that we struggle with in our lives, is being present? I mean, we live in a culture that is really, really busy, right? I mean, we live in a culture, a hustle and bustle type culture. We live, it seems like we are constantly in the worry about the things that we have to do, so much that when we actually get to a place when those things are done, whether it's a weekend or it's a day off or it's on a vacation, we worry about the things that we were worrying about, thinking that we might have not accomplished everything. It is entirely possible. In fact, this happens every Sunday. I'm convinced of this. Every Sunday, people gather and are yet gone. You can gather, you can be somewhere and not be there, right? And yet, what do we see in the Scriptures? We see that Jesus was one who was always present. He was one who was thoughtfully engaged, mindfully engaged, intentionally engaged. And it's something that we see right here in this text. If somebody can, if maybe you could read from your translation, Luke chapter 24. I'm going to start in verse 13, and to begin, we're going to read all the way through 17. Luke 24, 13 through 17. This is the NIV. Maybe somebody has a different translation than this. If you do, then please just let us know what your translation is before you read it. Who would volunteer to read that for us? Okay. Okay.
That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad.
Did you see what Jesus did in this text? Now, this is a story. We know that there's two disciples. One of them's going to be named. One is left unnamed. But they are downtrodden about the things that have taken place with regard to Jesus' death. And as they're walking on this road, we see Jesus do something here. What did he do? What's that? He approached them. He got them talking to him.
He kept from being recognized.
He had concealed for a moment his identity. By the way, I hope we see ourselves in the text. We are all going somewhere, right? There's times in our life where we don't recognize what God is trying to help us, teach us. Good. So he approached them. He got them talking. Yes? He didn't change their course. He went with them. He went with them. He actually recognized that they were going somewhere. Right? What are you discussing together as you walk along? He walked with them. Engaging with them. What could have he done?
He could have had lightning flash around him so they'd recognize who he is.
Okay.
Number of things. He knew what they was talking about.
Yeah. If he were in the 21st century, if he were us, what might have he done? He could have walked past them, but he didn't. He walked with them. He could have walked past them, gone about his business. What could have he done? He could have greeted them superficially. How you doing? I'm doing well. God bless you. Do you think he could have cut to the chase? You think that's what we do sometimes? Right? I mean, we got an agenda going in, and sometimes our agenda blinds us from seeing the person that is literally in front of us. But he didn't. He was available, and he was completely present. It is easy for us to be in a social environment and not even socialize. I mean, isn't it? It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I mean, Facebook. You heard the story about the older man who was talking to the younger man, and the older man had asked the younger man if he had any friends, and he said, "Yeah, I have over 1,000 friends on Facebook." And he said, "Well, have you ever seen these friends? Do you see these friends regularly?" He said, "Well, no, I don't really see them. I know there's some of them I've never seen." He says, "In my day, we called those imaginary friends." Oh, the irony, though, huh? A social platform. Yes, sir.
In this case right here, he walk with him a ways and all that. When a doctor comes into your room, he says, "I've got some good and bad news." And then he starts this long go-around deal and says, "Doctor, tell me what's wrong. Don't beat around the bush. Tell me what's wrong." So what have we done?
Yeah.
Talk to me.
Yes. Yes. We're going to get to his questions in a minute and at least make, I think, a very simple observation about his questions. But Jesus, he teaches us that in order to hear people, you have to see people. And in order to see people, you have to spend time with people. Years ago is actually when I worked here the first time. Came straight out of Sunset, young preacher. Learned a lot and very, very grateful for what I learned. But I remember there was this time where I was over at Denny's, and there was a lady named Veronica that was working there. She was about 4 foot something. She's actually just a couple of years older than I was, but she had lived the kind of lifestyle that made her look like she was older than what she was. So I tried to set up a visit with her and successfully set up an appointment. And so the day came where I was going to go to her. She lived in the trailer park that's right across from Railroad Road. Okay, where it used to not be a bypass there. You would just go around on 1836, and she lived in that little division there. And anyways, I went and knocked on the door, and she wasn't there. And I waited probably 15, 20 minutes, knocked on the door again, nobody showed up. Okay, that happens, right? So I go to the Denny's, and maybe a day or two later when she's working, and I talk to her. She says, "No, come by at this time." So I show up again, and this time I show up, and she's not there, but her son's there with his girlfriend, and they open up the door, and a plume of smoke comes out that smells like skunk, and she's not there. She's doing something. So what do? I'm like, well, dust your feet off, move on, right? She stood me up twice. I was a little frustrated. Again, 22 years old, something like that. I'm a little frustrated, and okay. So fast forward, I get a call like 2 months later, and she's in the hospital, and she had the nurse call me because I'd given her my contact information. And I go up there, and I'm visiting with her. I forget what the problems was. I remember some of the details, but they don't need to be shared. And as I'm visiting there with her, she asked me to close the door. She wanted to tell me something. And she ended up telling me that she was molested as a child by her father, and she has all these struggles, and that her dad actually is still molester and is on his way up there at that point to be able to give her a pair of shoes, and if I could be there while he's there. Now to this day, I could tell you, I felt about this small because I was so focused on the church stuff that I failed to see the person. You remember the story about the woman at the well? Jesus is talking to this woman, and she has a reputation. She ends up going to Sychar, which is on the outskirts of Samaria. But you remember the response of the disciples when they came back from town? Why are you talking to this woman? Anybody tell me why they went to town? For who? For the king. But yet, in service to the king, they actually didn't see the one that the king was there for. And he went out of his way. If you go back, we're not going to look at it, but if you go, he went out of his way to go there. There was an easier route. He could have avoided a lot of trouble, but he actually took a more dangerous route in order to get to that place. And they were too blinded to see her in their pursuit. So here's my question. What are some things that keep us from seeing people? And we're in a hurry. Hurry to everything. What I got going on, right?
Assumptions about people,
Stereotypes, prejudices, prejudgments about people. Oh, greasy hair, dark eyes, tattered clothes, uneducated.
No hair old. Same thing.
Yes. What else? Jobs, work, on to the next place, hobbies. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. They're not bad. None of those things are bad. Please don't mishear me here. Jesus said, you know, the Bible says you actually can look out for your interests. But Jesus, according to Paul, had the spirit that said, oh, I'm actually going to look out for their interests before I look out for my interest. Several things that keep us. This point was made earlier, and I don't know if it was Mike that had made it, but we need to be careful that we don't run past people on our journey. Man, this thing got really tight. There goes my clip. It isn't about us asking them to run with us. It's about us slowing down to be able to walk with them. There's a difference. And chances are good that every single one of you have a story. You do have a story, every one of you do, whether you realize it or not. An awesome story that God's given you. But in your story, in every one of our stories, there's somebody who walked with us. They didn't try to say, hurry along and run with me. They slowed down, just like we see in this text, and they walked with us, every single one of us. And what we want to be is we want to be the type of people who very, very intentionally slow down. We want to be the kind of people, okay, listen, I'm saying something that's important, that whose actions are not the result of agendas, but rather our actions is a result of our listening, our awareness. Don't allow your agenda to direct your listening, but rather allow your listening to direct your agenda. Does that make sense? Yes. You know, the idea of being all things to all people so that we might by all means save. We know we're not going to save them all. Might, may, and some. But that doesn't stop us from trying to do everything in order to be helpful to them. We have to be aware. Being present oftentimes requires us to be personal. Now, Jesus, in a lot of different places throughout Scripture, we see a lot of different environments, teaching environments. Sometimes he's talking to large crowds, right? Matthew into 4, 5, the whole Sermon on the Mount. John chapter 6 comes to mind. Big crowds pressing about him. Mark 2, a house that is just packed tight. So much that some friends don't mind cutting a hole in somebody else's roof in order to get to him. Man, that's some friends right there. But carrying him up to the top and lowering him, something else. Sometimes we see Jesus one-on-one, don't we? One-on-one, teaching one-on-one. But most of the time what we see Jesus in a small group of people. And that's what these texts highlight. Not from just Jesus' perspective, but we also see it from the physician Luke's perspective in the book of Acts, the earliest record of the church. We see them in this kind of small group setting. And then, of course, the Apostle Paul, a few texts that we have looked at here recently. Though I did put it, Acts chapter 20, verses 18 through 21. These I would want these to highlight. I would want you to mentally underscore this point that in order to be present, we have to be personal. If being personal for you is difficult, then I just would ask that you would commit it to prayer. On the spectrum of conversations, okay, and there is a spectrum from a disciple maker's perspective. You can't get to meaningful without the small. We're talking about the small this evening. But without the meaningful, you can't get to spiritual. And if you don't broach spiritual, there's no way that you're ever going to disciple them. But so often what we do is we want to go from 0 to 60. The first time or the second time that we meet somebody, we kind of overlook the significance of small talks. We might even touch on meaningful, and we just go straight to the spiritual and the discipleship. We need to be very careful not to do that. We have to be willing to be personal, and here's another word our culture doesn't like. We have to be vulnerable. Kind of have to put yourself out there some. And that takes time, okay? And so you can look at those on your own. We can't expect people to care about our story without listening to theirs. I mean, isn't that what Jesus is doing in this text? Somebody read 17 through 27 for us, please. Who can I get a volunteer to read 7? And preferably somebody in the New Living Translation. Stephen, you have the New Living? I got you the NASB, didn't I? Good for you. Who has the New Living? Go ahead, please. 17 through, actually, I said 24. Actually, read through 27 for us, if you don't mind.
He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened in the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him.
just go to 27 if you don't mind.
We had hoped he was the Messiah who would come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the Scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the Scriptures the things concerning himself.
Pretty cool text, right? Jesus had a Bible study with them. But did you notice what he did to get there? He asked some questions. You know, if you read through the Gospels, there's over 300 times where Jesus was with an audience and he asked a question. And this kind of reminds me of what we actually see over in the garden. We're in the garden, God walks up and he sees the man and the woman. And he's like, "Where are you?" I love that, by the way. Because they just did a no-no. And God still has an expectation of communing with them. It's like, "I expected you here. Where are you at? Adam, Eve, where are you?" He actually asked them 4 questions in that text. Here we have just a couple of questions. But like that, here, do we not imagine that Jesus knows the answers to the questions? So why does he ask the question? Yeah. And why would that be important? I think he wants them to process. I think that's part of it. I also think that God, who, by the way, is Jesus Christ, right? God, he's interested not just in, getting us to get it right. He's interested in it going beyond the head, and he wants it to go to the heart. And I believe the probability of that happening increases when there's a self-discovery. I also really do believe that Jesus is actually interested in what they have to say. Listen, Jesus asking them a question highlights the concern, the interest that he has for them. And he's asking a question not to knock them over the head, not to be argumentative. He's genuinely interested in who they are. He's genuinely interested in what they believe.
Are you the only one in Jerusalem not aware of what's going on?
Yeah, it's like asking somebody in Arlington, somebody asking you, "Hey, did you hear, who won the World Series?" Are you the only one here that doesn't know? Like, you could say that he's willing to ask what seems to be an obvious question in order to broach the subject. he's going to have a Bible study with them, but please understand that he doesn't get there without a conversation. And he doesn't get there without listening. We have to be not just concerned, have a concern for people, we have to have an interest in their story. So here's my question. As we walk with people on their journey, what are some things that we're listening for? It's a small talk, but what are some things that we're listening for? These are cues, by the way. I'm wanting to help you become a disciple maker, which is what Jesus wants all of us to ultimately be. So these are cues in your mind. These are little targets in your mind as you are listening. Steve?
They tell him that they had hope that he would be the Savior of the world. And that indicated that they had some kind of spiritual mindset.
Okay, yes. Very good.
And even though it was wrong, the idea was wrong that they had, because they were looking for a physical, in-person king to be over their nation.
Right.
That was his opening to reveal the truth of Scripture to them
Right.
and explain that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, by the way, in my little feeble mind, there's like really good fruit, and these are people that just, they could take off. And then there's a lot of the times, there's a lot of unpacking that you have to do just because the nature of people is very, very complex. You know, somebody says, well, you got an easy job. You only work on Sundays. And I'm like, I only have to work with the most complex thing in the world, the dynamics of human relationship. But yeah. It's not always, you don't always get somebody, God throws you a bone. He's like, hey, I'm going to make it easy for you. Like I call them good fruit. We know the story of the good ground, right? But what are some things that we are listening for? How about you're doing a good job at mothering? These are small talks, right? You're doing a good job at fathering, at parenting. Hey, you must be good at your job. What are some things that we're listening for? Got some attaboys in there? Is it just attaboys? You think?
You got to start where they are. And what you're trying to figure out is where are they?
Where are they? You know, it's crazy. I was actually excited for the Texas Rangers to win the World Series because I know that it's going to be a conversation starter with people. Automatically, I'm going to have an in that's going to allow me to have a conversation about something that's somewhat trivial, but it's going to at least give me an opportunity. We're going to have this commonality. We're listening for how they're enjoying their life. When we go to the gas station, when we find ourselves at a restaurant, whether it's Taco Bell or it's Whataburger, we want to see people, not just an employee. It might be something that they're frustrated about, something that they're worried about. I was sitting down at Starbucks earlier this week studying, and this guy sat down, an older man who I would come to find out he was He was a DEA agent, which I thought was pretty cool. And then he's now the CEO over some type of nursing home that's all throughout the state of Texas, nursing homes. But he just had this really kind of stoic look on his face, almost a bit melancholic. And I just stopped what I was doing, picked up my coffee, said, "How are you doing?" And "I'm doing all right." He didn't even look my way, just looking straight forward. And I said, I want you to know that I hope you're doing all right. I said, it seems like something is going on. And I said, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. I just want you to know that you are cared for. However he took that, however he thought that meant, what that meant, etc. He goes, "Actually, I just got out of throat cancer treatment." And he said, "My throat really hurts." And then his wife walked up and was doing a lot of the talking for him, but we probably sat there for 30 minutes and had a conversation. People, they have these struggles, these worries, these things that I was talking about at the beginning of my lesson. And, sometimes you can go 0 to 25 pretty fast, but most of the time, most people aren't going to respond without us listening to where they're at. Proverbs 18 and verse 13 says, "He who gives an answer before he or she hears, it is folly and shame to him." And of course, you're familiar with the passage in James. God's given you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Right? Slow to speak, be quick to listen, and slow to anger. Because the anger of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. Here's the point for the whole lesson. Is we can't make a big difference without small conversations. Small talk. Small talks, if you parlay enough small, you get to meaningful, from meaningful spiritual to discipleship. But it starts at small. Us having some small talks before spiritual talks. And being queued up enough in our mind about the priority of God's purpose and mission. Purpose for my life, mission in this world, for us to be able to see people. That's what we want people to do. We want them to go, "He or she sees me." We want in our minds to say, "I see you. I'm not so busy that I'm present. I'm completely present regardless of where I'm at." And so this is what I want. I want you to ask yourself this question: is what drives your zeal? What causes you to act in the moment that you are given opportunity? Is it your agenda, or is it your listening? Your awareness? Is it, I got a pre-planned agenda, and I'm going to come in, and I've got this kind of rote, kind of can thing that I do? Or I'm actually listening to where the person's at, and then creating a plan based upon what they say. This is called being situationally aware. Evangelism, disciple making, it requires us to not only be decisive, and you do, okay, meaning you have to make decisions as you go on, how you're going to navigate conversations. But it also requires us to be extremely aware, situationally aware. This is an encouragement because you don't have to have all of the answers when you go in. This is, I think, very, very empowering that God, through the conversation, is going to help guide you based upon what they say to help them take, if it's an inch down the road, an inch. So, again, the question is what is the motivation of your zeal? What motivates you to open your mouth? Is it an agenda, or is it something situational? Awareness, listening. We can't make a big difference without a small conversation. This church, I speak for the elders and the ministers when I say this, would love, nothing more, would absolutely love, more than anything, I think, to have a small conversation with you. We want you to know that Jesus isn't just interested in you knowing all the right rules, okay? He's interested in having a relationship with you. Kind of sounds like a conversation. And so if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, and though I have not said specifically what that relationship looks like or how we get into that relationship, let me tell you that the Bible is very, very clear about that, and it's something that we would love to sit down and talk with you about. And so we're going to have an invitation song, and our brother's going to come up and lead us. If you need to respond to the message, whenever you might be watching this or tonight, please do that now. If not now, then later. As together we stand and sing.